So thank you all for coming, much appreciated. Not an easy watch, I know, but at the time, but also important. But you know, it's also important that we wanted to, the film is very hopeful still, and I think that that's important. You know, we don't know what the outcome of the war is going to be, but we'd like to say that this is a battle that was won. People always ask, you know, they ended up saving 90% of these animals. That's incredible. And they didn't just, you know, it just didn't happen over a week. You know, these guys went back every day for 90 days, these kids, day in and day out. Vadim, you know, tries to articulate it every day. It was a one-way ticket. You know, they didn't know that they were gonna come back. Carol is actually one of the reasons we made this film. I had first seen the story in the New York Times, cover article in the New York Times about a chimpanzee named Cheetah. Oops, sorry. A chimpanzee named Cheetah who had escaped from the other zoo, the Kharkiv Zoo, and was probably trying to get back home to Ecopark Feldman. And Cheetah was wandering through the middle of Freedom Square. And it was just kind of cool, the idea, here's this chimpanzee looking for his freedom while the Ukrainians are looking for their freedom. The irony, like, what's gonna be the only thing that's gonna jolt these people out of the horrors of war? It's an animal, you know, it's seeing a chimpanzee. And so I called Ecopark Feldman, they didn't speak any English, I didn't speak any Ukrainian, but somehow we kind of connected. And then I saw an article that Carol had done with NPR, right, at the time? Yeah. And she had these pictures. And one of the pictures was the father bending down, right? And speaking to the soldier, you know, and I was like, okay, there's something here. So I bring this story up because you were there that day. And to me, that whole day, that whole scene, the father's empathy encapsulates everything about the Ukrainian people. And I'd really like you to share, what was it like to be there in that moment?
Well, I'm blown away. I mean, obviously this brought back so many memories, just a flood of memories of being there. These guys that were such heroes. I was in Ukraine for about 5 months when the war started, and I just saw this truck going by. I'm an animal lover. I love animals more than anything in the world. I saw this truck going by, and we followed them one day, and they opened the back, and here was this whole menagerie of creatures in the back. I'm like, oh, I have to do this story. So I talked them into going with them to Ecopark a few times, which was incredibly dangerous. I mean, these guys, I can't say enough, and women, Svetlana, I mean, they are fearless, that they could do this, and that they had that much love and selflessness to do this for these animals was, I mean, it's just beyond imagination. But that day particularly, I thought it would just be a nice feature story of animal rescues. And the first day we went, we were shelled and everybody ran, and I think there were pictures of us hightailing it out of there in the truck. And then the next day we went was the day they brought Denny to talk to the journalists. And actually the family was really angry with us when it happened. I think they were looking for someone to blame. We didn't tell them to bring him, but he wanted to talk to the journalists, so it was so unbelievably tragic. I mean, obviously frightening when the shelling happens. I can't even begin to describe how terrifying it is. It's so random. We had gone to rescue buffaloes. It was going to be the last rescues of these animals, and it was a long walk, and I was pretty slow walking back, and I thought it was, you know, it was fairly peaceful that day, too, and then all of a sudden, all hell broke loose, and we ran to the vehicles, and there were reports that maybe Svetlana and some of the other guys were hurt or killed. And we didn't really know what was going on, but we all waited. We hit the ground for a while because the shelling was still happening, but we had to wait because we knew that the vehicles were damaged, that the zoo vehicles, and we had to wait for them to bring whoever was injured or, still left at the zoo. And eventually everybody piled into the cars, and they brought Denny to the hospital. And as soon as they brought him out of the truck onto the stretcher, I knew he wasn't going to make it. It was pretty bad. But we went into the hospital for a little bit, and the mom was still holding on to hope. But when we left, they said by coincidence, I'm not sure if it was really coincidence, the soldiers that they brought back, one was a separatist, Ukrainian separatist, another was a Russian soldier. One was injured, and the other they had blindfolded him, and all the zoo workers were so distraught. They knew at this point that Denny had died, and they were distraught, and they were just screaming and yelling in anguish, and I'm surprised they didn't do more, because it was so heart-wrenching. And then Denny's father came out, and it was the most poignant moment of kind of war and innocence to me. I mean, he literally showed his son's blood on his hands, face to face, to basically the symbol of who was doing this to Ukraine, destroying the country, destroying lives, taking away his son. It was a very, very powerful moment, and I don't know, I'll never get over it. I'm sorry, I'm just a mess from seeing this. I mean, it was really hard being part of all that, and also just being an animal lover and seeing what these animals were going through and what the people were going through who loved them that much, and I could identify with that so much, and it was just so powerful, and seeing it all here, it was like, wow, what a movie.
Thank you. Yeah. Also Bjorn, who's the other journalist that you see on camera, he's from Build. He, like you, he's been through so many conflicts, but he said for some reason this one event just shook him. And why? What is it? What was it about this one event?
Denny or the whole?
Denny.
Well, I mean, all of Ukraine, I mean, the vulnerable are being slaughtered. I mean, it's not a war with soldiers on a battlefield. I mean, the whole country is a war zone, it's a front line. But this particular case where, people were literally risking their lives to save these helpless creatures who couldn't, I mean, we all have a heart for animals because I think most people do, because they are so helpless, they're at our mercy. And you can either be kind or cruel to them. And it was so pitiful to know that these animals were in this situation, and so humbling to see the humans who were going to their rescue. And then this young boy who just wanted, he was a volunteer, he would feed the animals, he was there with his parents. He just wanted to talk to the journalists, and he had to die. I can't begin to describe how brutal this war is for civilians, for everyone, soldiers of course also, but civilians especially. It's horrific.
Of course, we'll open up to questions, but one of the first questions that everybody has is, how are the kids? How are the guys? You said to me, right? What was your first question? God, I hope Timothy is okay.
Oh, I'm so worried about him. Speaking of fearless, and such a beautiful soul. I mean, he was positive through everything. I mean, he's just the sweetest soul, like so many in Ukraine are. I think it's so hard to bear witness as journalists to this, incredibly brutal war, because there is such a sweetness of soul, and the people have been so kind. At least in my experience, it makes it even harder to document it. And Timothy is one of those people. He's just like, he's my hero. But I'm very worried.
Well, everybody asked me the same question. After all the screenings, everybody says, first question, how's Timothy? Timothy, of course, being his loving self, is a combat medic on the front lines. What else would he be? And but he's doing pretty well. He's there. He's surviving. Feldman's an interesting character. He's also what we call an overpreener, which is basically when you love your animals so much that you hug them to death. You're joking me. That's Feldman. And it's interesting how to try and kind of come to terms with him wanting to have a zoo, and he felt it was really important for the children to be able to connect and have connection with the animals. And obviously he did a wonderful job in terms of running this organization earlier that used animals for therapy, well documented, did a great job of that, had hooked up with the local university. But that does bring up some questions. What's the role of animals? Do we have that agency in terms of putting them in zoos and all that other stuff? And so that was an interesting perspective. I really like the boy's perspective. When you see an animal in its most vulnerable sense, when you see a human being in the most vulnerable sense, that changes your perspective. And I think that changes our perspective on whether animals should be in cages. Look, our most basic instinct is fight or flight, right? Lizard brain goes all the way back down to every animal. When there are bombs going off, explosions going off, and you are trapped in a cage and you cannot run, that is so difficult. And that's why not all the animals died, not as many animals died from shrapnel or explosions. They died from heart attacks because they couldn't go anywhere. They couldn't access their main primary function, which is to run, which we all have. So that is really an interesting idea. It's not pretty, but it's interesting to think about. The other thing that we didn't put in the film is that a lot of the animals killed their own babies, especially the tigers, the lions. They just knew that they were starving, they weren't producing enough milk, that it just wasn't going to be comfortable. And so when they took a lot of the animals out, they did find a lot of dead babies. Whether they were stillborn or were actually killed, we don't quite know. But this is what happens, right?
Yeah, I mean, as an animal lover, I do have issues with zoos. I believe in refuge, and we need to help animals and certainly try to save species. But zoos, putting anyone in a cage, I always feel like if you wouldn't like it done to you, and that's just been my whole foundation of my belief system, you don't do it to anyone else, including all the animals we share the earth with.
Let's open up to questions. Anybody have any questions?
I don't have a particular question. I just would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart. You pictured such an important movie. Our family is from Kharkiv. I left Kharkiv way before Feldman Ecopark was built, but my sister and my parents, they lived through that time when it was very popular and very, very important portion of our favorite city. And I just would like to thank you that you actually pictured all this movement of evacuation of animals, because from the beginning of this full-scale invasion, we were all glued to the phones, and one of the pages I was looking at was Feldman Ecopark, and we were reading about the story as it develops, and I'm very thankful that you picture it, and the whole world can see this story. Thank you.
Thank you.
When you tell such difficult stories, it's a question for both of you. When telling such difficult stories, how do you choose what to tell, what will be in the final product? And in a moment when you record, write down everything, how do you cope with everything that's going on in a moment? Because you're going through the moment itself, and then you also need to show sympathy to people. Like, what do you do? Thank you.
Well, I think you have to, every moment is different, and I think you're a human being first, photographer second, so I think above all, you need to show respect and as much as you can, but in circumstances like this, there's also a trained journalist, you go on autopilot sometimes, and I'm petrified during shelling. I mean, that was horrible to go through, but I think it's your role to document. That's the reason you're there, and I think there's, especially in Ukraine, a great understanding of the power of the press and the importance of a free press. I mean, people used to come to me and say, thank you for doing your job, which here I'm called an enemy of the people a lot, which honestly, I mean, that to me was so refreshing. That's what would bring me to my knees a lot. It wasn't photographing destruction and, a lot of death. It was when someone showed such incredible kindness, whether it's to me or someone else, in the middle of the madness and the chaos of this horrible, brutal war. But as I said, the most tragic thing would be for you to be there and not photograph what's happening. And when that happened with Denny, it was horrific. And it was the one time I saw Timothy it really affected him a lot. But you have to document it, and then afterwards, in the editing process, you decide what you show, what's important, what moves the story along, and what is not really necessary that might cause pain.
It's a really tough question, and in fact, that scene, right? Some people, like, there's been numerous screenings where people are like, no, you're on her too long. We hold on her too long, and at some point you have to say, like a mother's pain is important to show, it's hard. That's where you just have to go with your instincts,
Well, the other problem, I think people like to, shoot the messenger, basically, blame the press for pictures that are disturbing, but I've always been of the belief that it's far worse for everyone living this hard situation day in and day out and day in and day out than someone living somewhere peaceful in their comfortable living room and viewing a picture that's disturbing them. And to me, I'd rather see them take that rage and turn pain into purpose and do something to help, not just blame us for showing the reality of a horrific situation.
Yeah, I wasn't there that day. I don't know if I had the camera, I wouldn't have been able to do it. Not that I didn't, just because I'm not brave enough. It takes a certain amount of bravery to be able to do what she does, because it's still like divorcing your ego from the situation. It's not about you and your perspective. It's tough. I don't know if I would have been able to do it, but I did know that. If we're gonna make a movie, sometimes it's your responsibility to go there. It's your responsibility to show that. And there might be a network executive who's like, no, it's too much, it's too much. It's like, well, if you don't, are we making the audience uncomfortable? Or, are we showing them the truth? Are they mutually inclusive? So that you just have to know what's right and what's wrong in that situation. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Katerina. I'm a former Ukrainian military. I want to thank you for this movie. The way you did it brings a lot of emotions. And my question is, when the movie finished, you almost said sorry for showing you this. And I've been now living in Florida, doing a lot of volunteering stuff, showing some movies as well. And I have to do that as well, but I always ask myself why we have to say sorry for showing the reality that is going on.
Well, I'm not really sorry, or else I wouldn't have made the movie.
Right, but you kind of you kind of have to say that for the people that you're showing this. And I do the same here in the United States. But I always ask myself, why?
life is hard, and you know, after working all day long, do you want to come in and, you know, be pulled apart? You know, some people like that, some people don't. But this is the reality, you know. So thankfully, we're all here as a, you know, not a captive audience, but a willing audience with which to understand. You know, there's so many things. You know, there's a lot. I wish, you know, there's so many wrong perceptions about this war. It's frankly ridiculous. I can't believe we're even having a lot of these conversations. It's ridiculous. And I don't have to tell you guys in this audience how ridiculous that is, but just as an observer, I was sitting there with all these folks, and you know, they were having them speak Russian, right? Svetlana speaks Russian. Many of them speak Russian. Their families, for those of you who don't know, are just across the border in Belgorod. You know, a lot of them, and their families are hearing one thing and they're hearing the other. And I said, guys, like, just, you know, just accept it. So maybe, like, why not just accept it and take the occupation for 5 years? Like, is it worth what you're going through? And without skipping a beat, they were like, absolutely. I'd rather fucking die than go the other way. And to me, that was like, I was like, wow, I wish so many Americans could hear that these people who could kind of easily lay over were willing to die. And I said, why? And they said, we're not going back. Which also resonates with, you know, some messaging here. And so I thought that was just so interesting. Like, that's what freedom is, and how far these people are willing to go.
And the courage and resilience and spirit of the Ukrainian people has been so humbling and so inspiring in so many ways. I'm just, you know, as a journalist, I've been doing this for 40 years, and I have covered conflicts and other issues with the human species, and I just don't understand personally why we haven't evolved to a point where there's some mechanism in place that could stop something like this. I mean, from the very beginning, I know how complicated it all is, but as a species, how can we keep doing this to each other?
So my hat's off to you journalists. I know sometimes you have to tell so many ugly truths, but these are truths that the world needs to know, because these people can't be forgotten, they cannot be left behind, and I don't ever, ever, ever want to hear a Ukrainian say, did you forget about us? What about us? So thank you, I appreciate that.